Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem with me, Ann Schaefer. I'm an independent curator, and I specialize in prints and printmaking. Now we're talking about fine art limited edition prints generally, lithographs, screen prints, woodcuts, etchings, engravings, you name it. Within the umbrella of Platemark, we are running a couple of different series. There's an ongoing series of interviews with people who occupy various roles in the ecosystem, like curators and artists and printers and gallerists. But this is series 2, A History of Prints. In this episode, Tru Ludwig and I complete our two-parter on the Enlightenment, which we started at the last episode. In this episode, we're going to look at 3 books containing prints, obviously, that took great strides in improving the scientific understanding of human anatomy. The first is by William Hunter, The Anatomy of the Human Gravid Uterus from 1774. Crazy book. Also, we're going to look at the Bernhard Siegfried Albinus book from the 1740s, The Anatomy Tabulae, Sceleti, et Musculorum. And then we'll also look at the French artist Gautier Dagoutier's color mezzotints from his, a few of his books from the 1740s, Myologie, complette being the first one. Then we'll end with Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, which was produced over multiple years in the 1770s. It was multiple volumes, I think 17 volumes of text and 11 volumes of planches of plates that were all engraved by a variety of artists. And it's just an amazing illustration of how knowledge became codified. It's really quite incredible. And at the end, we get really philosophical about life and the meaning of being a human on this planet. So stay tuned for that. It's a long one, but stick with it. I think it's worth it. I hope you are enjoying the history of prints. I think it's a vital part of our work. I feel passionate about our shared visual culture and how important it is for all of us to understand how information got circulated way back in the day and how it continues to get circulated on the internet. It's all part of the same idea. The early printed image was that era's internet. The images that Tru and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You know that. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Hey everybody, Ann and Tru are here. We're back to talk about the Enlightenment continued.
Well, we're starting again only because apparently the Enlightenment, the Endarkenment, the Enlightenment, as I came to realize it just before we had started talking, and frankly, we covered a bazillion different topics. However, the point that we were coming to realize was that I think the way both of us were brought up, listening to the concept of the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment, the Endarkenment, the growth of the individual and the brain power of the individual and how that was coming through in the Enlightenment and being trained in a certain way was very exciting. But it is also something that we're looking back with a different set of lenses. Everybody's looking through lenses these days. But these lenses are making us aware of how much we took for granted and how much needs to be thought through more thoroughly. With that said, I guess the lens that we should shine on ourselves is our positionality, wouldn't you say?
Oh, sure. You can do that.
I am a gay trans white man who uses the pronouns he, him.
I am a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her.
And every now and then, we just goof around and have a good time. And the neat part was that last week was the first time Ann and I had seen each other in ages. And we had no idea we were going to get on a big riff about the Enlightenment because these are conversations we've never had together.
That's true. It seems like a simple topic, and then...
oh, my God. It's just as thorny as the election, you know?
It keeps going.
It does, because there is no right or wrong. There's only make and do. Well, this is supposed to be the history of prints, but since the history of prints involves the real world and everything around it, and it has a finger on the pulse of the socioeconomic and the mores of the day and literature and visual art and music, even even geography, zeitgeist to be sure. And it's a thing that I still really adore, like I said last time, was that how the history of print does get to function slightly outside of that usual academic strata. And so we had talked at length about the academy, the establishment of academies during the 17th and the 18th century. We talked about the French Academy and how it had been established in 1648 and reestablished in 1663, but how they had completely established themselves and come up with this kind of the rigor, the scaffolding that has held through well into the 19th century and in some places still does. And so the concept of these good old boys, I always call them good old boys when I show the Zoffany portrait of the academicians, and how these are the folks that came up with the rules, and you were going to study the casts, and you were going to draw those, and you're going to take your classical art theory, and you're going to do master drawings from the écorché, which is where this is the springboard for this particular episode, and ultimately working from the live model. If you were male, and if you could correct all of these horrible little messes that nature made and smoothed off all the surfaces and made sure there weren't any dark and coily hairs and there was no cellulite and droopy skin and any of that, I think it would be Rodin that would give things their droop and their tautness. I don't think until Rodin's She Who Was the Helmet Maker's Beautiful Wife showed the grisliness of the beauty of old age. But, this sense of the neoclassical and what the Academy says is the thing that was celebrated every year. So I had gathered together several prints that had been based on views of the salon-style hanging at the Academy. Well, there was a really early one that just fascinated me because I had never seen it before, and it would be quite a coup, I think, to get to see it, which is a view of a salon from 1699, and I was wondering what you, Anne, thought about that particular image. It's quite remarkable, really. When you think about, you see people in their peignets and their powdered wigs and whatnot.
Well, and what's cool is that this is taking place in the Louvre, which is a palace at that point. It's not really an art school, and it's not a museum yet. And so these people in their finery are wandering along the hallways, the corridors, the giant corridors with the barrel vault ceilings, pointing out this, that, and the other thing in all of these paintings. And they're all stacked on top of each other.
Which is why we call it salon-style hanging.
That's right.
Because it was the minimal concept of hanging things, at 60 on center and with a nice breathing room between. It's also interesting to just see on the left-hand side of this image by Hadamart, I believe it is, of some poor guy that's way up on a ladder, and they're hoisting up.
Trying to hang some.
Oh, yeah, and it's probably 4 by 6 feet in a big, heavy frame. And you think, these poor guys, they didn't have a scissors lift. They're hanging all of this stuff on the walls. But the idea that the excitement that would come from being in such a thing must have been phenomenal. But see, in this particular view, you also see that everybody that's present is either hanging pictures or of an incredibly high class. And,
I love that they're having to hang whilst people have been let in.
Yeah.
There's the back of a frame visible on the ground next to the guys hanging. And clearly they're just working their way down the hallway.
Yeah. And showing great perspective and, all of that with this engraving. Part of the problem with researching this particular topic, which was just, I kept falling down various holes of, oh my God, that's so cool. But, this was a wonderful exhibition, tradition, art of the Parisian Salon 1750 to 1900. And the very first sentence totally grabbed me. The signal aesthetic space of modern spectacle culture. The Parisian Salon remains the indispensable precursory context that gave rise to virtually everything defining today's art world, from superstar artists in the art market to museum exhibitions and biennials, from consumer culture to institutionalized art history. And that's really it right there. All of the big hoop-de-doo and what the things that make the news, the things that are surefire sales points.
Wait, so for clarity, this is an exhibition at the Redwood Library, which is in Newport, Rhode Island, if I'm correct.
It's exactly right.
Right. Modernity versus tradition, art in the Parisian Salon, and this show took place in 2017.
Yeah, and it's just fascinating to see what they had gathered. Just the history of the salon would teach us everything.
Well, and interesting also because it's a library. This is the rare books department that's putting this together, which is no surprise, really. Because I'm not sure. Well, you would know because you've been digging down some rabbit holes whether or not a major museum has done a show about academic anything lately.
Oh, lately? I think it's starting to kind of come back.
It sure should.
Yeah, absolutely, because, the art of the pompier, the big academics, Jerome still is a rock and rollin' artist. But this idea of who was it for in the instance, so this was an engraving we're showing from 1699, and the next one was an interesting one, the view of the Salon du Louvre in the year 1753. And it's just fascinating to see how an artist would grapple with the scene of how these images get put up in the space and who's there. This one actually has a sense of a Piranesi about it, don't you think?
It does, yeah.
It almost, it feels like it's not quite complete, or maybe it's, I don't know, has a completely different flavor. It says the print is a rare depiction of one of the biennial exhibitions of contemporary art mounted in the Louvre Salon Carré. And the artist is capturing the high pitch of anticipation as visitors from various swaths of Parisian society mount the stairwell and emerge into the light-filled gallery overlooking the Seine.
Oh, this is interesting. First of all, it's in a stairwell, so people are coming up the stairs on the lower right, and they're continuing up. But that means that the walls are extra, extra tall.
Oh, yeah.
But look who's here. There's a little Rembrandtian figure there.
Exactly. And,
this is Gabriel de Saint-Aubin.
And it's also more etched, it seems to me, than engraved.
Yes.
But it's also the excitement of this. It's no longer just this fusti, we're going to wear our,
Right, but that it's, look, there's a dog.
Right.
What?
And it's becoming more and more
populous.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And just the light-filled space of it. And I don't think people even begin to realize how phenomenally unique this was, because there are no cell phones, there's no, TVs, there's no billboards, there's no movie theaters. This was the capital T, capital H, capital E event. Then when you start thinking about how it opens up even more, the next image I'm showing is a view of the Salon of 1785. And this is one I enjoy using because this was the Salon, the Paris Salon, that introduced a certain painting which I tend to introduce the 19th century with, or neoclassicism, because it captures on the wall, centered on the back wall, is
high up.
Yeah, I know, is the Oath of the Horatii. And one of the things I do enjoy telling my students was that when you got into the salon, the people who were the really great ones were at eye level. Mm-hmm. Those were the A people, and the people that were a little bit higher up, those were at the B level, and the people that got way up there at the very tippy top, those were they were skied, and those are the folks with the C's. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, here we see the Oath of the Horatii. It's kind of a B, but at the same time, if you look at how
that's where
all the big history paintings are. So it might be, perhaps that's more of an American art concept when the paintings are smaller. You wouldn't be putting a Bierstadt down amongst the riffraff. But
this is, by the way, this is by Marini, is that what that says?
Mm-hmm,
okay. 1785. But what's fascinating is that the people are now dwarfed.
Yeah.
And the grandeur of the hall that's the subject.
Because this is now the Salon Carré. It's the big square room, the Salon of Apollo in the Louvre. And that's a huge space. And it is. It's really funny. It's almost like they're in the city square. Mm-hmm. It's an immense space. And you can see that there's an animated crowd. They're not all just wearing powdered wigs and whatnot. It looks like there's active discussion happening.
Well, they all almost look like little Callot figures.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. And this is a really good size print.
Is it?
You're going to ask me that size.
It's large.
It is. I think it's something at least by 16 maybe by 20, something like that. It would have to be,
How else do you show them?
All that stuff, because that, of course, is also puts a lot on the artist, the engraver, to capture that entire scene. I'm showing now the image by Martini from the exhibition of 1787. And it's just fun to see how it's the same space, but what are the images that are being, it's a wonderful catalog, the big postcard of what you went to see that time. And in many ways, I think that's like, oh, are you going to go to IFPDA? Are you going to go to the big print fair? It's kind of like that, and all the buzz and who's got the big booth at the front, like that year that Tandem Press had the entire Cottingham alphabet in the front. That's a big deal, and then, was it just last year that LaToya Hobbs got the big crossroads with all of her big woodcuts and that kind of stuff? That's a big darn moment of approval,
But we don't recognize any of these paintings, do we?
Oh, I think actually if we worked really hard at it, we could. You got your... Yeah, but you got your basic, there's
There's a Last Supper in the last one.
There's a last, and then there's a guy on a horse, and there's a crucifixion.
There's like tiny little oval portraits kind of interspersed and filling in holes where the big ones don't quite, meet up.
And that's an aesthetic that some people don't have anymore, and some of us actually do. That's the way the office walls are for me, where I am, because I keep hanging all the student work, Sure. Now, here is an exhibition, and again, it's still by Martini. This is the part I think is hilarious, because this is at the Salon at Somerset House in London in the same year by the same artist, Martini.
This is his specialty.
Yeah, but what you can see right off the bat, well, for one thing, they have beautiful skylight, light coming in, but you can also see that this is such the age of the grand manner portrait. You can just see, this is all about big English people in portraiture. And, that was...
proud, too. They're all dressed like the people in the portraits.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's like a little Pinky and a little Gainsborough girl kind of running around. What are those two dogs doing down there? It's not quite as Callot-ish, No, it really looks like...
More Debucor.
I think he's just really showing off that he understands his audience. These fashionably dressed figures viewing the works and conversing amongst themselves, blah, blah. And, isn't that hilarious how that part of the title is in Greek?
Oh, weird.
Yeah, and it's just showing how importantly, we're smart. We're very British.
Oh, that's funny.
But that's great education too. That was a requirement, again, of understanding the classics of Latin, of Greek, and those sorts of things. And I bring that up because one of the things that I always stumbled over, what can I omit when I always run out of time teaching? It's supposed to be something like Renaissance to 1855. When I teach art history at MICA, we get to divide it into three. So you have the ancient world, or what someone could call caves to cathedrals, and then there's the Renaissance to 1855. Why 1855? Because that's when Courbet makes his realist manifesto, and then you have modernisms. Well, the grand manner and all of Lady Bunbury as so-and-so giving her truth to the muses seems to me to be fairly avoidable. I'm sorry if all the Anglophiles are being wildly annoyed with me, but
they'd be on a slightly different trajectory. But
they do get to show up in the salon, who are all these great folks, because the portrait painters are the ones that are in charge in many ways in the British Academy of Fine Art. So it's also interesting that even as late as, that in January of 1887, I've got one more really neat little engraving that was done for Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly for New York that were talking about the French Salon at the Louvre and explaining to American audiences what that salon was. And
by our friend Martini.
And I would love to see that issue. I think it'd be very interesting to see what they had to say about it. At any rate, the point is that system that was promulgated and adhered to and reinforced by the academicians, those guys that were the ones that would award the Prix de Rome. Let's say that you're an academician for the French Academy of Architecture, Painting, and Sculpture. And there was a Rome office or a Rome branch of the French Academy down there. Fragonard actually won it one year, which is kind of hard to believe, but he did.
Wow.
Fragonard got to go down to study in Rome for quite a little while. And that prize was established in 1766. You go down, you study all the great stuff at state expense. That's a big deal. Well, the Academy gets to choose who's going to get to go do that. The Academy is the thing, what I try to explain to my students is how strong it became. Now, we know that there were academies all the way in Italy, all the way back into the 1600s and, Bologna and so on and so forth. But the list that I have that I show my students is that the big one that everyone seems to press against the most would be the French Academy of Art in Paris, or l'Académie des Beaux-Arts. Well, Berlin is established in 1696, and London is almost an entire 100 years later, which I find amazing.
That is amazing.
But that's again, what is it that's so air quotes great about English art is that's where it's really starting to pick up, and they established their academy. And, Benjamin West is there from the United States and is one of the founding members of that. And then Boston, a mere...
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
In 1780, Boston's Academy opens up. The National Academy of Design in New York City is in 1802. Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art is established in 1805, and my school, Maryland Institute College of Art, is the oldest continuously running degree-granting institution of the academy nature in the United States, and God willing, we'll make it to 2026 and get to 200. And then the next slide I'll show when I'm teaching at Peabody is that it was founded in 1857.
The Peabody. Oh.
The Peabody's Conservatory of Music, because it too is a music academy.
Right.
So that legacy goes all the way back, and it's a very strong way of organizing things, because there would be, the academicians would be able to tell you, we have to make sure the artists are of the highest quality. This supersedes the guild system. It's almost better than the union, if you will, and it's the kind of thing that ensures the continuity of style, such as the neoclassical style. But what we want to talk about also is how the academy is setting up different modes of thinking and this age of reason, as much as the academy is putting things in stratified layers, like the hierarchy of painting, and history is at the top and genres at the bottom. But it's the age of reason, which is all of those great minds that we had mentioned in the last episode, but Voltaire and Rousseau and Diderot and Ben Franklin and George Washington and these great Enlightenment educated thinkers that are really starting to turn things around. And so we're going to talk today about one of the big pushes in terms of anatomy, because that was one of the amazing things about the Enlightenment that is going to essentially start questioning virtually everything. I had asked Anne to repeat this. Voltaire championed freedom of thought. His rallying cry was, "Écrasez l'infâme. Let us crush the evil thing," which was referring to religious superstition. That, to me,
that says it all. Really.
It really does.
Yes.
And of course, I set up my slides for my students. Maybe you probably want to show them this one in the notes, because I have.
The Portrait of Voltaire?
Yes, by Houdon, but he's also looking down upon, the portrait of Louis XIV, and he's looking down upon the Swing by Fragonard, that this was the kind of...
In the slide.
And he was looking down on them in his world as well. That's the point,
He's the ultimate realist.
Absolutely. So, the concept of who are these Enlightenment thinkers and how they look down on the old modes and the superstitious thinking of religion lets us start to...
They believe they are enlightened because they are looking at science and fact and paying attention to the power of the individual brain,
and that
in a way that had never been before.
And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So first we'll have a little chit chat about, let's talk about the case of the brain, let's see what it's housed in, and then the last thing we'll talk about is Diderot's Encyclopédie, because that is the summary of all things Enlightenment. So this age of reasonment, this, go ahead, say it.
The age of reasonment.
Then reasonment.
That's great. The age of reasonment. The Enlightenment, or also known as, and coined by Tru, you hear it first, Enlightenment.
That concept of science, direct observation, the power of reason, and the perfectibility of men and women, those are all the keys to human progress. How do you get to know these things? It's by questioning and looking and researching and finding out everything you possibly can. And so one of the things I like to show my students is that the understanding of the human body was phenomenally important. And one of the very first images that any art student probably ever sees is our old friend Rembrandt van Rijn. And this is from 1632. Do you recognize it?
Oh, well, they're cutting open the cadaver. I forget the name.
The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp.
That's him.
And they're actually opening up the forearm of a cadaver.
This is the first time an art student would see a dead body?
Pretty much, yeah. Certainly. I actually have a whole spiel where I give, what anatomy looked like going back. But this was a corporation picture, when you think about what it meant. This was 10 years before the Night Watch, or the mustering of the troops of Franz Bannenkock, the big Rembrandt. But the idea of corporation pictures, or groups of men who are in charge of their own doing. That's a beautiful thing that the Dutch Republic does for itself. These, people in their austere, dark clothing with their white starched collars and their big hats. And there's this momentary view of these folks looking at Dr. Nicholas Tulp opening up the forearm of this cadaver and looking down into it. And the awe of it is really quite thrilling. And there, a connection could be drawn to the book that's down in the corner, which more than likely they're probably looking at the...
Vesalius.
That's exactly right, the Vesalius on the fabric of the human body.
Right.
And the first printing of that was in 1543. I believe the second one might have been about 1555. The one we have at the George Peabody Library, that was published in, I think, 1555 in Basel, in Switzerland, because it's neutral, it's outside of the Catholic Church. And what I'm showing also is an écorché figure, which would start to become standard fare in virtually any worthwhile artist studio. Now, this écorché figure here is made out of wax. Wax could be colored and molded in such a beautiful way, and it could replicate systems of muscle. And so this concept of what is anatomy and how much more can we know. Well, the first great anatomist, the one that said, I've spent many evenings amongst the stinking remains of cut up bodies, and if you can't handle it, maybe you don't have what it takes to be an artist. Leonardo has a very, you need to be able to understand and be present at this difficult moment. And so I'm showing the 2 pages out of it belongs to the British Crown.
It belongs to the king.
Yeah, Leonardo sketched that in 1512 or so, and what he's showing us is the first time, but he wasn't showing anybody because it was never published.
Right.
It was in his notebook. In his notebook, he could give you a picture of the fetal position of this child inside the uterus, and he even has, it's really stunning how he's showing essentially how the walls unzip as the placenta releases from the uterus, and several, studies, and you can see that it was several different visitations of it, different pens, different size writing, to really understand that. But that was from 1512. But the first time we really see a baby in a uterus, and it's crown, it's in, what do we call that? When it's engaged in the pelvis. It's engaged because the head is now down and ready to be born, is in a drawing that was in the book published by William Hunter, who is such an important artist for the British. And I just want Anne to talk to you about what you're seeing. I mean, they're separated by so much time. Obviously, the drawing was done first, and then it was engraved, and it was published in the book on the gravid female uterus in 1774. So I've shown the original drawing, and then I'm showing the engraving after the drawing. It was published in William Hunter's most incredibly important text, The Anatomy of Late Pregnancy. It was plate 6 of William Hunter's 1774 book, The Anatomy of the Human Gravid Uterus. Copper plate engraving by Jan van Heemstek. But, just talk to me about what you're seeing there.
Well, it's startling.
Yes.
Because somehow, Leonardo's renderings are almost sweet. Where the baby's sort of hugging itself, and you can imagine he would pop out being happy. And in the Hunter drawing, the baby is he's clearly too big for the mama.
Well, it's time. That kid's at term.
It's definitely time. But the way that he's drawn the uterus flayed open is kind of bizarre, but even more disturbing is that he's sliced the thighs off so that they look like
hams.
They
absolutely look like hams. When I show this, I've always been in absolute reverence of the brilliance of what it took to draw that. Because he's dissected out, and obviously this was a dead woman who was at full term, without question, which means that she and the baby died, obviously. But it's the first time that you see this peeling away, almost like peeling an onion back, to understand how the fetus is completely wadded up in there, how the head is really pressed down into the pelvis, and understanding, you got a sense of the layers of the placenta and the walls.
I just noticed the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's all there. Well, 1512, and this is, let's say it's 1770. That's a long time, and this is the first time you ever get to see it with death-defying accuracy.
Right.
It is unbelievable. It does. It looks photographic.
Yeah.
Except that the only means to reproduce it at the time would have been in
engraving.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you have this book, and I'm bringing this up and showing it now because what we'll see The next two guys are actually predate that. But I wanted for you to be able to understand how important this concept of anatomy and how brilliant the representation of the female body and the various systems that could be seen and then made visible to the rest of the world are. But I wanted to bring to your attention, let's see.
The thing maybe we haven't said out loud is that the Enlightenment is really colored by this need, desire to figure out basically every last thing.
Absolutely.
The stars, the sun, the planets.
Question everything.
Botany.
And figure out a system, and it's all connected, and that it could actually be, you are allowed to think these things. You know why? Because you are a human being on this earth, and you've got philosophers coming up with a concept of free will, and people
self-determination.
Yeah.
Which had not been a thing.
No. Of course not.
I mean, it's really fascinating, and it's the beginning of the modern era, really.
Absolutely. The Enlightenment is the beginning of the modern world. When I look at these images, they're so impressive. Okay, when I started college, I was pre-med, and I wanted to I knew I would be a really decent surgeon. But then I looked at all those people who I came to realize didn't need Adderall, that could organize their time and could take the calculus and sit quietly and do all of those things, and I realized that can't be me. I had no idea what was going on, but I did then realize, maybe I want to be a medical illustrator. But I didn't do that, and I'm fortunate that way because that was just as computers were starting to come in, and boy, I wouldn't want to be doing all this digital medical illustration. I wanted to draw all of this stuff. I wanted to be present at a dissection or do the dissection and see that stuff. And so for me, I'm going to continue to just totally geek out on the way that these images are presented, because these are the single most modern views of the body that I think we all would be aware of. I think this is what we're more used to now in terms of the truth of what we're seeing, because they're damn near photographic. The expertise of how the dissection has been done is really quite remarkable. But there's something else about how they're presented. And it's interesting to think about how art and medicine and print are all coming together with this and these Enlightenment publications. I read a couple of different viewpoints on this. Hunter made his observations during his work dissecting pregnant bodies from 1740s to 1770s. A 2010 study of Hunter's work claims that he and his collaborators had murdered a dozen pregnant women in order to have a continuous flow of bodies at hand. Hunter also had a steady supply of corpses from the execution squad, smugglers, and criminals. We should keep this in mind when we look at these plates, violent in their depiction of cut stump bodies frozen in time. It is a reminder of the long patriarchal past of obstetrics. And in a way, it is.
Absolutely.
Because, when women have to lay on their backs or put their feet in stirrups to give birth, that's for the doctor's convenience. That's not what the body needs or wants when it's time to produce an infant. Gravity has a lot more to work on when a woman is in a proper position. Well, interesting also to start thinking about how artists were instructed to draw from the dissections and not from memory. But Hunter had a very interesting way of talking about the body. The other thing about the gravid female uterus is that the idea of looking at or dissecting a pregnant body was especially rare due to the lack of specimens available and the taboos connected to the use of these at the time.
Well, if murder's involved.
In fact, one could argue that Hunter worked at the only time in medicine when such a methodology would have been considered in any way ethical. Well, that's a nice way to put it. But, at the time...
How could that be ethical in any way? They were criminals or something?
Yes, because they were criminals.
The pregnant...
Apparently they were. Well, because,
Were they witches or something?
Yeah, that's just it. So when Ann and I came together last week, I was like, this has been really disturbing reading, because obviously not all of the criminals could have been very advancedly pregnant women. But actually this whole tome goes backwards. It starts with the fully pregnant and it moves backwards towards when they're smaller. Well, then it means you have to have an array of criminal women who, that becomes worrisome, does it not?
Well, yeah, so this is the whole where things start sliding into endarkenment, because for the greater good of scientific understanding and knowledge, one feels they are free to murder.
The greater good.
Right.
It's all for the greater good and the greater knowledge.
Really.
Well, to us now, but at the time it was like, think about but wait, there's more. Because, Hunter's radical idea to depict the pregnant belly from inside out, therefore visually as well as medically transformed the field of obstetrics. The realistic and three-dimensional depiction of the uterus thus put a stop to the prior imaginings and creative and varied depictions of pregnancy. The careful shadowing and attention to detail in the style of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings would later be described as beautiful and delicate, just as Anne just had, by art and science historians. But it is important to remember that the style and method were chosen for practical medical concerns and not for the sake of beauty. For these illustrations, it was for medical, right?
And it probably saved bazillions of women in the future.
In the future, except for the greater good. Yeah. So, it's these worrisome kinds of things that, well, they are worrisome. However, there's also the concept of thinking about how they are viewed, because this is really quite something. I still am absolutely fascinated by how glorious this rendering is of this fetus inside the mother's uterus, and that it was like high time, and it's almost so dazzlingly
with the ham-like legs.
It's so dazzlingly convincing and fascinating to me that I managed to ignore that slab of ham at the end of each of those cylinders until all of a sudden I go, wow, that's a slab of ham at the end. Mm-hmm. Well, I then came across this writing. I will probably bungle it, but it's actually quite interesting. This writing by Jessica M.E. Kirwan. And it's fascinating to talk about when she's saying, in June, I suggested that some of the foundational beliefs about fetal personhood that dominate today's abortion debate are influenced by William Hunter's 1774 obstetrical text, Anatomy of the Gravid Human Uterus, which represents pregnant women as beasts alienated from their fetuses and women's contributions to reproduction as inferior to that of the fetus. And, we could overlay and overmap all kinds of thinking about this because, it's a fascinating study, but it is a still life, literally.
Well, right.
Not to remark.
Because she has been cut up and is now an object. She becomes an object.
She becomes an object. And, here he says, in showing passive, fragmented, dissected women alongside the whole active, life-appearing fetuses, Hunter joined an ongoing philosophical discussion concerning women's roles as mothers and citizens, as a discussion that was especially lively at the end of the 18th century after the rise in popularity of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Émile, 1763, which argued that women's domestic and sexual roles were primarily in service to the nation. Well, there we have that. And then Hunter goes on to talk about how diagrams, maps, and charts are most often found in contexts that offer the kind of knowledge which, in our culture, it most highly values: objective, dispassionate knowledge, ostensibly free of emotive involvement and subjectivity. So, when Hunter writes in his introduction to the Gravid Uterus, he says, anatomical figures are made in two very different ways. One is the simple portrait in which the object is represented exactly as it was seen. The other is a representation of the object under such circumstances as were not actually seen, but conceived in the imagination. Well, here is Hunter giving us these absolutely seemingly factual views, in fact, painfully factual if you think about how they've been butchered. Mm-hmm. The advantage of showing something as it was actually seen, carrying the mark of truth, as he says, it becomes almost as infallible as the object itself. Well, here we have a moment, as Ludmila Jordanova has pointed out, Hunter himself employed a topographical analogy and considerably developed it by likening the medical practitioner to a general and the human body to a country under civil war or invasion.
What?
Listen, Hunter said in 1784, to do his duty with full advantage, a general must make himself master of the anatomy and physiology, as we may call it, of the country. He may be said to be master of the anatomy of the country when he knows the figure, dimension, situation, and connection as the lakes, rivers, marshes, mountains, precipices, plains, woods, roads, passes, fords, towns, fortifications, etc. So when he gives us these views of women, of parts of women with this fetus inside them, this is all the chunk. It's like this is this quadrant of the map. That's all you need to see.
Right.
And that's what you're going to get is the truth. They're really quite remarkable views.
Yes.
In one respect, they become unnerving.
Yes.
So that concept of the body is the mapped and topographical views. Well, that's Hunter's way of putting it. And this was the single most important anatomical book that was published in 1774.
He was a medical doctor,
Yes, he was. And he was hired by the British Academy. And that's in this painting, William Hunter giving his lessons on anatomy to the academicians, also by Zoffany. You can see him here giving the lesson while he's demonstrating on the back of a strapping lad, a well-muscled fellow. Behind him is a skeleton in a case, and behind that person is an écorché figure. All of these were the knowledge of how the artist should understand from the scaffolding up, from the skeleton to the musculature to the actual human figure.
Yeah, I mean, that makes absolute sense.
Of course it does, but here's the part that you may not. I remember when I first stumbled across this in the British, in the Royal Academy. This, what do you see, Ann?
Well, the main picture on Tru slide is a probably wax figure of.
No, it's not wax.
Oh.
It's cast from the body.
Oh shit.
Exactly. His name, they refer to him as Smugglerius.
Oh, Jesus.
Because he was a smuggler.
Oh, well, it's an écorché figure who's leaning on he's seated, leaning on a hip and on one hand, and it's echoing, I assume.
It was positioned precisely to give the dying Gaul a Hellenistic sculpture.
The dying Gaul.
And Smugglerius it's a Hellenistic sculpture from, I don't know, maybe in the 3rd century before the Common Era.
We have seen it before, sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, you're tired. But the idea of what is the actual body doing under those beautiful poses is really key. And I remember going, oh, holy shit. Well, that's...
So they made a smuggler dude get in the position?
No. He was executed. They flayed him and then positioned him and cast him in plaster.
Oh, it's like...
Mm-hmm. Body Worlds.
Body Worlds.
Gunther von Hagens and the plastinating and well, and then one more, just because this is the later one. Banks was the one that was in charge of this one. Ann's having a difficult face here, but it is actually another criminal who was executed, then flayed, and then is in the position of a crucifixion, so that you can really see what those muscles really do. In one respect, it's grisly, and in another respect, for those of us that always want to strive for the truth in our drawing, that's where it comes from.
Right.
And you have to be vigilant and dedicated and practice it just as much as any musician would try to get every note in tune and in exactly the right spot and the right key and all of that. It's the same thing, but it's unsettling because what we're seeing is beneath the surface. But Hunter was the guy I like to think of as contributing that sense, how strong the British Academy and obviously the French Academy would have wanted that as well. Mm-hmm. So that was the rugged, difficult stuff. So let's back up, because I still want to talk about those Enlightenment publications because they're pretty neat. But now Ann won't have to look quite so worried because we're going to go.
I've just walked out of the Mutter Museum.
Exactly. That's exactly it. But again, that concept of how to be the best artist you can be. I mean, Leonardo did dissections. Michelangelo did dissections.
That makes sense.
And people who want to get really good at it would watch them or see them now. Of course, you just pull them up. Yeah, and actually, on TikTok, I've got this guy who actually is teaching me little lessons, and he's got obviously the bodies that were donated, and he shows me the trachea and what this does, and he lifts up the flap, and there's the lung, and it's amazing. I know some people are watching, fuzzy bunnies jump across whatever, and I'm like, oh my God. But it's that knowledge is power kind of a thing. When you see an image like Hunter giving his demonstration of anatomy and think about how art and science had really started really depending on each other. Because, the more that science improved, the better the artists they needed to render that. And the artists were expected to know those things. And it's fascinating to see that happen. Well,
it's really interesting. I just had this thought. Ding!
Please do.
Well, just it's the rise of the academy goes hand in hand with it, because as an apprentice in some single person's shop, you weren't going to get this kind of education.
Absolutely.
So the expansion of the education required to be a class act artist.
Absolutely. And so you get the best, and Hunter was regarded as the best of the best. Cool. Another thing about all of the plates from Hunter's book, well, you know, the Royal Academy had acquired several studies of human anatomy, most of which had been published for physicians rather than for artists. Yes, of course, they had Vesalius's anatomy, and Albinus, which is the guy we're going to discuss next, and a couple of other guys. And then there were some books that had been devised for the Academy. But I just think it's fascinating that the Academy of, you know, painting and sculpture got the best medical doctor to teach anatomy. To me, that's just phenomenally important. And the fact that the Academy... It
means that the academies were held in that high esteem.
Absolutely. Right. Here's the part I was telling you about from the same era survives a cast of a figure anatomized on two different levels. From a slightly later date, an écorché of a crucified man by Thomas Banks, circa 1800. The best known of the Academy's écorchés is that of the smuggler, set in the pose of ancient Greek sculpture known as the Dying Gaul. 1775, and then recast in 1834. John Flaxman, the Academy's first professor of sculpture, kept a skeleton which survives in Sir John Soane's Museum, London.
Real skeleton.
Yeah. You know, now we wheel around. Yeah, of course. But, you know, mine that I have was cast from human bone. And you can see the difference. It's not the idea of what the bones do, but what the bones actually do. And you know, if you look at the architecture of the skull of my cast from human bone skeleton, you can tell that they aren't, you know, Caucasian. The cheekbones and the way that the face is, I'd imagine they're from India. Oh. And it's interesting, and many of the study skeletons apparently did come from India.
Yes.
They're convenient, you know. Well, and, you know, and the fact that they're using, like, smugglers and people that had broken the social contract to put them, you know, they punished them and then they put them in these positions. And now, if you think about it, when you donate your body to science, you're doing something of great nobility.
Yeah.
Now.
Right.
Well, you know, when you think about the individual, that is one whose body shall not be divided. You know, the horrible way of punishing somebody in the ancient Greece was to take their body and send it to the different parts of the world.
Wait. That's the what do you call it, of the word individual?
Yeah.
What do you
Indivisible, individual, you will not be taken apart.
Because you won't be...
Because you aren't complete and your whole soul escapes and you're not... Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's you don't want to be a individual.
Right.
You want to be an individual. One nation, indivisible.
Got it.
So thinking about, you know, all those history paintings where they're scattering the bones or it's just, you know, taking a person apart from their head. Right. It's just the most deplorable way to be. So we've talked about how, you know, the female body or any body could be a country or islands and making it an object. But what I think is delightful is this next book that I'm going to talk about. Now you have to just step back about 30 years. But I remember the first time I saw this image from this, and I just thought it was the most beautiful thing. Of course, you're going to say you say that about everything, but it's probably true. But I remember seeing this book by Bernhard Siegfried Albinus, and of course, that's the way his name is Latinized, because otherwise this German-born fellow would be known as Weiss.
Weiss, huh?
You know, and on the body, when you do a dissection, it's called the linea alba, the white fascia that is down the middle of the body. It's Weiss. Oh. Linea alba. It means white.
And the title is, of course, in Latin, which is?
If you want to have the text of the tabula, tables of the skeleton and the muscles of the human body, it's more fun to look at the main page and say, Bernhard Siegfried Albinus Tabulae, sceleti et musculorum corporis humani. Because we're Latinizing everything, because that makes it sound so much more important. But Latin was the intellect's language. And when you think about how this fellow's name is Siegfried Weiss, you know, Bernhard Siegfried Weiss, I think Albini, Albinus would be way cooler. Well, the cool thing about this fellow, Bernie Weiss, Bernhard Siegfried Albinus, was born in 1697 at Frankfurt on Frankfurt an der Oder, the Oder River, and he died in 1770 in Leiden. And at the time, he was chair of anatomy, surgery, and medicine at the University of Leiden. Now, Leiden should sound really familiar. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, don't they have the oldest university in the world, or second oldest, or something?
Well, also Leiden is where and that's where Rembrandt was born.
Rembrandt was also from.
And so there's a really important school. So Leiden had this medical background going way back. Well, Albinus was there, and I think it's fantastic to know that he was doing all these things. He had published his first book in 1734, the next in 1737. But the part that I really want to share with you, which is so exciting, is the volume that he published in 1747. Largely, it says, at his own expense. But, the thing that he had done was that he had been working in the studio of Leblon, the very important color printer, Leblon. And actually, after Leblon died, Albinus managed to get the privilege for printing in multiple colors and owned it for like 30-some years. So he had the lock on this. So for this volume on the Tabulae, sceleti, musculorum, corporis, humani, Ann is snickering, this is good. At least I didn't say
Okay.
Furburger. That was the previous book. Now you saw those in the previous book on the gravid human. So Albinus had written 2 books prior, but the one I really wanted to share with you was this magnificent tome from 1746, 1747, which he had published largely at his own expense. Now, he had been working a lot with the engraver Jan van der Leer, and they wanted to have very true to sight kinds of drawings of the human body. So they had actually set up webbing. They basically set up a grid, a wire grid, so that they could get really truthful proportions of whatever it was that they were sketching. But you realize now this is, some 40 years earlier than Hunter. So what Hunter is reacting to is what you're going to be seeing here.
Oh, okay.
Now, they were making it really quite as true to sight as they could, the anatomical specimen. But what they also did was they wanted to just sort of make it more interesting, and in part of the Enlightenment concept of more information is useful, they would also put these bodies that they were illustrating into interesting landscapes. And so the one that I just adore is, and she's got the cutest little face. You should just see it. It's so delightful. Well, the images, the one I remember seeing first was this almost completely demuscled skeleton who's just sort of standing kind of in his oratorical position, and standing behind him, munching away, is a rhinoceros, like you do, in a nice leafy landscape. But at the same time, it's really quite lovely. And, the Tabulae sceleti, it goes logically through the various layers. The first image I'm showing is a back view of our almost completely dissected out human body, but you're getting to see the rhinoceros from behind and the human body from behind. And I think that's sort of it seems to be maybe a pyramid upon which that is the background for that image.
Oh, right.
And it's really exquisite drawing, and then engraved quite beautifully. And you can see that it's the woodcuts of Vesalius given a much larger grayscale tonality. I think he took his clues from the fact that all of those muscle men, remember that the landscape lined up behind them. So here we have, the back view of the rhinoceros, and then the front view of the skeleton with the rhinoceros. And I'm thinking,
bones aren't pretty. Their bones are weird.
Well, the bones are weird because they still have some of the larger muscle masses on them.
Okay.
Which is interesting. For instance, that droopy thing, I think that's the diaphragm.
Okay.
But it's beautifully drawn, and it gives they're giving you a place for it to live. And the other thing that we can actually do, if you wanted to, is leaf through the whole book.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So I'll give you just thinking about how they set these things up. See, the next plate after they take off all of the muscles, you have the complete skeleton, but then flying behind him is some little angel with a cape and a wonderful kind of picturesque landscape behind. And then after that, you get just down to the bones that are all labeled. It's really quite remarkable to see the logic of how it was set out and thinking about what it took. I mean, again, this is brand new kinds of imagery. So let's get to the leaf through part, because thank God for the digital age, we can really go playing in these books now. I've always wanted to go visit the medical library, because Hopkins has the medical library, and it has, I know the Albinus is in there, I know the Vesalius is in there. Come on, I got to go leafing through those things, and you can really see how the whole book is set out with complete discussions and even the beauty of how do you lay out a page of muscles artfully. But the idea, even here, even as it's the Enlightenment, we need to present all of the important pieces of information, it's still an issue of how do you put it on a page beautifully. Think about the latissimus dorsi that you're seeing executed there and how beautifully that has to be arrayed on a page and it still be clear. And then, of course, binding the book and whatnot. It's just glorious. But to see our friends, the rhinoceros, show up, to me, I think that's delightful. Now, there were those who would take offense at that and think that that's ridiculous to put them, why would you show the human body with a rhinoceros there? And Albinus defended it staunchly, and he said it had every reason to be there, sort of like a comparative anatomy or what have you. But I also can't help but think that very famous rhinoceros by Dürer had to have been somewhere in the mix there. That rhinoceros print by Dürer, which had been created purely on description. It's a heavy 4-footed animal that's got armor. His was completely using his imagination to concoct this beast. And here you have something that is clearly done from life. There's no way you could have made this kind of an image of a rhinoceros without knowledge of it, which tells us about zoological gardens and all those kinds of comparative anatomy and that kind of study. Albinus is great stuff. Do you want to say anything about these fabulous illustrations at all?
Well, they're just humorous.
Humorous?
Well,
they're just humorous. I get it.
The rhinoceros is not going to be your pet, and he looks like he's, showing his cow at the 4-H club or something.
He's just a lovely guy. I mean, it's exquisite artwork. And, the other part that's so beautiful is just seeing the plate mark of, this is an engraved plate. And you can see that the making of this book was still something that had to be letterpress and typeset and all of that. And so that was a tremendous step. But the next one I wanted to share with you would be shortly thereafter was by Jacques Fabien Gautier. Now mostly people call him Gautier Dagotti because he decided to stick the Dagotti on there later in life. Now, see, I think that's cool. You can just reinvent yourself, whatever you want to do. Right. Make yourself more important. So he was born about 1716. He died in 1785, and he had made an amazing contribution to, I remember the first time I saw some of these at IFPDA, and it blew my doors off.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
So Dagotti, he had learned from Leblon, he had learned about the 4-color mezzotint process. And actually, it was 3 colors, but Dagotti added the 4th block. It was like 3 colors with Leblon, who was a terribly important Parisian printmaker.
Key block?
And according to 3 different sources, it was that Dagotti added the black block.
Wow.
Yeah. So what that gives are these really lush, marvelous, they're almost sumptuous in a weird way.
They are.
Because the other thing he uses a lot is a green background, which when you think about that in contrast to the redness of the musculature and whatnot. Now, see, when Hunter was talking about how ridiculous the anatomy books had been in the past, he was essentially referring to things like this.
Well, ridiculous.
Because Dagotti had said he left the head on there to make it more pleasing. And then this was the angel woman,
It's like a little, coquette with her little headband, almost looking at you over her shoulder like, hey, look, here's my flayed spine.
Yeah, but it's okay, because here, learn,
It's almost like you could read that as a corset almost.
Yes, indeed, with all of those stays, correct.
Right.
So, yeah, So Zagotti was born in Marseille, and he had, according to this source, had said that he was a pupil of the painter and engraver Jacob Christophe Leblond. And then he essentially, the student then comes to rival the master. And he had worked there, and they had actually done he'd studied his Albinus, and then he starts making his own medical illustrations. But it was fun to see how he decided, I'm gonna make an entire volume, and I want them all to be beautiful. And it was because he wanted all students of medicine to be able to look at this, and he wanted to collaborate with great artists. And he wanted to work with a lecturer in anatomy at the Jardin du Roi. He published 3 huge anatomical texts in the next 3 years, and all of the plates are huge and magnificent.
And some of them are fold-outs.
Oh, yeah.
They become almost life-size.
They are essentially life-size. Yeah. So, and the other thing is that they have...
bold. This is a bold move.
Very bold. So he's figuring out all of the great stuff. So here I'm showing Anne my page that says... Christophe Leblond, the inventor of a 3-color printing process, used red, yellow, and blue plates. After Leblond's death, Gautier not only took over the business, but he also successfully claimed the title of inventor of color printing because he got the royal privilege, like essentially saying, I got the patent now, and he got the funding for his own printing, and he said that he added that 4th plate. And it's that block plate or the black plate that really snaps things into focus. If I look at risograph prints today...
Oh, they're missing a key plate.
They just, they're always sort of, to me, they look like wheezy, like you weren't pressing down hard enough when you pulled your screen prints.
But people had already been doing chiaroscuro, and there's often a key block in those, which may not be black necessarily.
But that was in woodcut.
But, okay.
And this is in mezzotint.
No, I get it.
Ask Carol Wax, man. This one was called the Flayed Angel, or the Anatomical Angel, from the Myologie complette. But I remember seeing this at the IFPDA, and she looks, as you say, tremendously coquettish. He just wanted it to be more appealing so people would take more time to look at it, because she's sort of, it is eerie, but it is, you're right, it's almost strangely fetching, as you say, it's corset-like. And so all of these have a really remarkable place in the history of art. But the other thing, if you can tell from this particular illustration, how glossy and sheeny they are, because there's so many layers, they oftentimes look like an actual painting, depending on the reproduction. Now, in this particular case, I'm showing a whole array of arms, and the way that you can see how all of the deltoid and all of these various muscles insert and originate, the biceps and whatnot. And I'm actually comparing that to Leonardo's sketches. And again, I use this particular one because that's the arm that's used for one of the disciples at the Last Supper. But he knew what was going on underneath every one of those disciples. He knew it. Yes. And here we have the way, this artful array of, I don't know, does it look like a bunch of swimmers kind of standing in line, kind of just looking at their arms? Yeah. It's fantastic. In a way, it's also kind of surreal. What do you think of this one? Anne's little eyebrows flew right up on this one. Go ahead, tell him more. What do you see?
Well, this is a print, a mezzotint maybe? Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's 2 severed heads that are facing each other, kind of engaged in looking at each other, but not really.
They are, because he's creating a dialogue again, right?
Yeah.
And one still has its eyeball in.
Right. There's 2 eyeballs in one and no eyeballs in the other, but there's a tongue in, but it's not skeleton. It's all nerves and vessels, blood vessels. It's a very...
Think about what that dissection entailed.
Yeah.
And then to make the rendering of that...
Oh, look at the ear canal.
Yeah, looking at the color, and also just the voice pipe. It's just... And this is from the anatomy of the head in printed images representing the natural appearance of the brain at different levels, the distribution of the vessels, the sensory organs, and part of the nervous system, taken from dissected and prepared portions of the subjects.
That was the book title.
Sometimes those pages, it could be long.
Go on. In cataloging world, we would have said anatomy of the head, ...
But in this case, it's like, what you're getting.
And this is also Gautier.
Absolutely. And again, you've got the veins, you've got the arteries, you've got musculature, you've got shading. It's so intensely well observed. But he makes that also conversational in much the same way the flayed angel, as though these earlier anatomical books were making them into things you could engage with in a different way.
And they both look like women.
Yeah, yes, you're right about that. Here's another. So there's the Exposition anatomique des organes de sang. It's the anatomy of the senses, and there are 18 plates for this. I don't know. This one's from 1752. He seems to get more and more.
This is Gautier.
Yeah, it's all from the same fellow. But just seeing how he's playing with these dissected out parts. Here's the top of the tongue, the under tongue. This is what we do when we bisect the head.
That's weird.
But it also feels surreal. It
does feel really surreal.
And the one in the lower left corner reminds me of the chien andalou, the eyeball thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's very Dali-like.
Yeah.
Because it's
well, everything's dismembered and floating in its own...
But done convincingly enough, it's like an uncanny valley kind of disturbance.
But they are thrown together in a scientifically organized way, but also nonsensical in a surrealist way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, that's because you would want them more.
Right.
And then just, it almost looks like brain salad, but they're really quite remarkable arrays. Anne will have these in the image list, and you'd be surprised to think that these things are coming from the 1750s.
And the nasal cavities on one, and then ears
and the stapes and the various, listening, and the fossa of the brain, and the part of the bony structure that makes it possible for us to hear. And then I think I've got one more. And I just decided I'd use full bore. I'd use their quote. Gautier's work has always been regarded with some ambiguity by art critics and anatomists alike. Choulon in 1852 wrote of him, quote, his anatomical illustrations, while they may perhaps be fascinating to the layman, impress the critical observer with their arrogance and charlatanry, and do not recommend themselves to the student of anatomy, either for their faithfulness or their technique. I think he's full of shit, because honestly, there's more information there than you could get from a lot of other things. Just even the concept of, in this case, we're looking at a brain and the eyes and the way the ocular optic nerves are situated. Is something peculiarly symmetrical and elegant about it.
It looks like an Archimboldo part.
Of course it does.
And or crustaceans of some nature.
Mm-hmm. That's the remarkable part. But he's doing it in 4-color printing on an epic scale.
Right.
So there had to have been a demand for it. So think about it. You've got the quest for knowledge. You've got the science of it. You've got the art of it. You've got the print of it. And the sensibility of this fellow that knows that he wants to really turn things around and have this become available to people. These look like they could still belong to somebody in a weird way, and hunters don't.
Yes. But these, the Gautier d'Agautier, I think it cannot be underlined enough that they're 4-plate
color.
Mezzotint.
And
that's insane.
That's the point. That's like mezzotint to me in 4 colors. Ask Carol Wax. Man, you're talking.
No.
I wouldn't mind.
Well, she's done it, but
yeah, but what it takes to make that happen. Right. How thrilling is that? So
it's just the way your brain has to work in order to be able to become the chromist and separate everything out
and then realize
where the lights are coming out, and it's insane.
4 plates, and all on this magical thing called the interior of the human body that's been dissected out and showing the sensibility of it. That thrills me in ways I can't even begin to say. When I started poking around and when I found this one, I thought maybe I should just use that for a Facebook profile picture. They're just fascinating.
Well, it does look cartoonish.
In a way. So does the guy with sticking his tongue out with one eye dissected out and the other one not.
Right.
There's still some that's it. There's still some humanity in some of these.
Yeah.
The flayed angel. And I thought I'd share with you the pregnant woman with the baby sitting in the uterus. It's sort of
Look how high up her boob is.
I know. And, you've got the muscles indicated and whatnot, but they're a little eerie.
A little weird.
That one doesn't feel the veracity of it.
Well, this is all, sort of mannerist, elongated, weird head.
Exactly.
Size. Things are not quite right.
So when you think about how...
And some of these, little offshoots on the right and left of this.
The fallopian tubes and this is
up. They look like they belong in the Garden of Earthly Delights.
They do, and I think the color palette kind of does too, and almost like, well, she deserved it. But these are still.
But these aren't. He's not.
They're still alive, and they're looking at you. It's like, look, I'm pregnant, as opposed to.
Well, what's he drawing from?
Some kind of bodies. Even the breasts on the one on the left still have the skin on.
Right. Yeah.
But he does this. He literally does this to make them more attractive, and so you'll look at them more.
Longer, right.
Yep. And even just the cross sections of the heads with the hair and the ears, and you're still and actually, that's not too terribly dissimilar from the Vesalius, except when Vesalius is in a black and white situation with just a crisp outline of a woodcut, it's one thing. But when you have it in 4 colors, it makes Anne go blah and cover her face up with her scarf because quel horror. I'm glad that really are peeking inside a guy's head here.
No shit. No kidding.
But it is the Enlightenment, and how shall we do these things? Oh, God, there's still faces on that one, too.
More Gautier, Gautier.
I just thought I'd throw them in there for S&Gs, shits and giggles.
This is about the spinal column.
And the way it leads into the brain, and yet there's still eyeballs on the woman, and her heart is still, in a way, it's almost still pumping away. Yeah. Well, the age of reason and the idea of science and direct observation, I just wanted to bring up the one last tidbit that is all a part and parcel of this concept of the Enlightenment need to know everything. And I think the perfect summary for that would have been Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie. I just love looking at these dates, because they're all just right in the middle of that whole century. And Diderot was one of those great guys. He was at the same time as Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And in fact, he had decided that he was going to put together an encyclopedia for the first time. And he was going to do it in a different way than any encyclopedia had done in the past, which had been done by a single writer. And so what Diderot decided was he was going to create Encyclopédie ou dictionnaire raisonné des sciences de encyclopedia, or a systematic dictionary of the sciences, arts, and crafts. Everything. All human knowledge. Jesus. In 17 volumes is what it became in terms of the text.
With the individual writers, subject matter experts.
Absolutely. And that was also new, because having the expert on each topic, that's really spectacular. Now, Diderot himself probably wrote about 1,000 of the entries, but he also got some of the greatest writers of the day to do their various specialties. So it's wonderful to know that every branch of human knowledge, his goal was to compile it into one spot. And so he began this about 1751, and he had literally had international contributors to it. This was really a break from the past. And it's also interesting to see that, they spent all the effort in the first several years on the 17 volumes of text, but then they spent the next number of years coming in intaglio.
I mean, you could tip them in with the letterpress text, but it would be a pain in the ass, right?
Yeah.
And it would be much simpler to have a separate volume.
Right. And then eventually there was even 5 supplemental volumes because...
I think when we were kids, didn't your encyclopedia have all of the planche at the back of the volume?
Oh, God, do you remember that? Or you had an art history book and there would be like a chunk of color illustrations in the middle?
Yeah.
Well, this is absolutely visual. When we look at Hunter's image, or we think about... When I first saw the Flayed Angel by Gautier, I was like, that's a hoot. But you realize what we're accustomed to in terms of an encyclopedia. I think I mentioned how my dad had been a salesman of the Encyclopædia Britannica. Well, imagine when you're putting together for the first time the sum of all human knowledge into one spot. And the other idea that they set out with was that they wanted to transform the way people thought, so that they could think for themselves. And it was this democratization of thought, of thinking, and how to love this, the secularization of knowledge. It meant that it could be about everything. It didn't just have to be about the church. It could be about people. Go ahead.
But it's fascinating fascinating. Like, this is before the revolution.
Yeah.
Right? So we're still under, strict royal rule. Everybody has a role. And you can't bust out. But there are these burgeoning scientific societies.
Mm-hmm. And it's exactly this that leads to the revolutions. Wow. In fact, the coolest part about that, the idea was to have the upper middle class be able to be informed in much the same way you would have your grand tour, you would, so on and so forth, that people needed to educate themselves in all fields of knowledge. And so that idea that all of that was there was great fun. Well, eventually, it had been published for the first, 8 years or so, in Paris until 1759. But the French government started feeling very threatened by it. So they had to kind of uproot. And the Catholic Church also hated it.
Of course.
Well, because of things like, here's our entry on God. And literally, I'll show you that in just a section.
Lordy.
So eventually, the Catholic Church has banned it. And so the third edition was printed in Geneva.
Oh.
Switzerland, So the encyclopedia was, one of those things that just allowed people to start thinking in new ways. And it was even a break from the way that Francis Bacon and John Locke were talking about how you are a blank slate when you're born. These guys say it's all out there and you can get it any way you want. And it's this Enlightenment idea of breaking things into clear categories. I love the fact that they did things alphabetically. And so religious topics could be right up against secular topics. Oh, how dare you intermix them? That was just, and they were of equal importance.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, it leveled everything.
Well, now that's a real problem if you're the Catholic Church or if you're the king. So the other thing that was really quite fascinating about it, I found some other things that are kind of neat. Imagine getting your first volume of the set and you get them in unbound sheets. Remember, things were done bespoke, right? So don't drop it. But you could get them bound any way you wanted. Subscribers were initially charged 280 livres, but over the years, as the work expanded in size, the cost rose to a total of 980 livres, and by the end of the 1770s, copies of the first folio edition of text and plates sold for 1,200 to 1,500 livres. And get this, a livre was equal to 1 day's wages for a manual laborer in 18th century France.
Holy crud.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge is everything. But, it's not on parchment. You could have it.
Only, though, at a certain point if you had means.
Right.
So it's like this artificial way of keeping the masses down still.
That's why I always mention about how I was raised bright trash.
Right.
Because, we had encyclopedias, we had all the magazines, we had no TV, we were supposed to read.
Right.
And, we had these books and you were supposed to, and we owned encyclopedias. I mean, to me, not the American one, the Encyclopedia Britannica, the bicentennial edition, leather bound, I can just imagine when the next volume of the Encyclopédie was ready. And what you would do, imagine reading all 17 volumes, because in those volumes contained everything, the idea of all the crafts.
You could write your entire book report from the encyclopedia.
Oh, come on, absolutely. And here's the part that I also find...
My kids didn't have an encyclopedia.
Oh,
we did.
Your kids didn't?
No.
Well,
did they have had that?
When did they get a computer and when did they start looking at Google and stuff?
Exactly. But they didn't browse and they didn't come across the flags of the world.
Oh my God, or the anatomical.
Or the anatomicals.
With the clear page, the layovers.
Pages,
oh my God, or the fold outs. And the Encyclopédie had that. So I'm showing it right here. Just a beautiful double page spread. There's Denis Diderot. There he is in profile. And the idea of the portrait of the great genius, that was also a huge issue of the time. While I mock the grand manner and late Bunbury as but the concept of brilliant people being enshrined in portraits and that you wanted to have it, like getting your picture of Luther. Here's the man who has contributed so much to the complete knowledge of humanity.
Years earlier might have been the king as the
Absolutely. So, imagine getting all of this. So I wanted to share with you, here, get a hold of the frontispiece. Oh, it's so lovely because, the dictionary of all of the known sciences and arts and crafts, all of these things, the frontispiece has everything. It's an allegorical composition. I'll just give you in which I'm going to read that to you, and then Anne will point out. The female figures representing reason and philosophy unveil the figure of truth, positioned in the upper center of the composition. A radiant light emanates from her, while to the left, imagination prepares to adorn her with a garland of flowers. Other allegorical figures representing the arts, sciences, and trades look on or display instruments or texts specific to their fields. Interestingly, the frontispiece was not designed and engraved until 1772, well after the publication of the 17 text volumes had concluded in 1765. But by that time, it's like, this is a history painting right here. You know, it's just a whole temple of knowledge. I also enjoy
in the guise of a religious.
Absolutely, because knowledge is God. Here you're starting to question how the planets move. Here you're questioning how we're made. Here we have anatomy and we're dismembering bodies. We're individualizing them. There's entries in this on shipbuilding and anatomy and mapping and God, and it's got all human knowledge in it.
But the thing that's so bizarre about this frontispiece, and I don't know who the artist is, said frontispiece.
Honestly, I don't remember seeing it.
There's a signature on the bottom, but I can't read it. Anyway,
it has an address.
Yes, it does have it has an address. So when you first lay your eyes upon said frontispiece, one immediately thinks it must be some religious allegory of some nature, or maybe mythology, maybe. And then all of a sudden, yes, with the radiant light around
the columns, the columns,
and the clouds, and they're all sitting on clouds. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait, it's all women.
I know, that's the part that makes me so happy.
It is good, but then half of them have boobs hanging out. So then you're like, wait, who's this for? But it's such a weird mishmash of, it's like it's appropriating.
Oh, everything.
Everything that's come before.
Because it's a complete, but they're like neoclassical women, but they're like religious allegories, but knowledge is the glorious.
And then it's this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
What are the ladies on the earthly bound ladies holding up a magic lamp or something?
Well, they're all holding, crafts and whatnot. I'm going to suggest that our listeners actually have some fun looking at that. It's really fascinating to see what they have to say about these things.
It's bizarre.
I will tell you that knowing, well, of course, I'm getting it on a different screen because
and it's also, I don't usually pause and try to pick apart the frontispiece.
Yeah, but in this case, come on.
Right.
Because it was added after. It's like, okay, now that we got it all said, here are the cliff notes for what we're thinking.
Right.
We have given you all knowledge.
Given to you
all knowledge
women.
of arts
women.
and science and craft, everything. And muses. They're emblematic. It's not who would want to look at a bunch of guys that are celebrating that knowledge? Think about it. What would that look like?
It's all written by white men.
Well, yeah. But at the same time, we have these.
It's fascinating.
It delighted me to see that. Wait a second. Let's see what the
I'm conflicted about it, honestly.
Well, that's wonderful for us, right? Yeah. And of course, Anne always gets a little annoyed when boobs hang out. Anyway, I'm not gonna lie.
Who's that for? Men.
It's the 1700s. Allegorical. Okay, so the British Museum says allegorical scene. A nude female figure entirely covered by see-through veil stands amongst the clouds in front of a classical colonnade. Next to her, on the right, a crowned figure holding up a bit, ? And a kneeling, a bit as in maybe horse, ? And a kneeling figure holding the Bible. On the left, a figure with winged head and crowned by a flame bring a garland of flowers in the middle part. More allegorical female figures, all sitting amongst the clouds and holding an attribute. In the lower part, more figures, with the man carrying a pot on a plate. Frontispiece to Diderot and D'Alembert's Encyclopédie. But it's really interesting. I think that putting together, how do you put together the sum total of the world's knowledge into one frontispiece? Although I think they've tried harder here than in many places.
Yes, for sure.
And then to have discovered the next image that I need to share with you. I mean, come on. I remember the first time, this is so bad, I almost bought it. But we were up at the Met. We were in the museum shop at the Met, you and me. Mm-hmm. And they had a Dover book of all the planches.
Oh.
Or at least most of them. And the planches on printmaking are just tip top. That's we'll get to that in a second. But the fact is that it's showing all of the crafts and sciences. So to be able to give those to everybody. You know, the context of these trades was such a hidden piece of knowledge until the Encyclopédie. Now, I'm showing it in this point, the preface, but also the figured system, the system of human understanding, which was also a break from the past, because they put this in the first volume of the 17, and they were breaking, as I'd say,
fold out.
Yeah.
Sort of outline chart thing.
And it's really stunning because they've made it incredibly systematic. Yeah. John Locke had said that the human mind, as I'd said, was a blank slate, and we just start filling it up with all of the sensory stuff we have. Well, in the discourse at the beginning, Diderot and D'Alembert argued that in the Encyclopedia that, get ready, the human knowledge consisted of 3 branches. Now, this is so Enlightenment. First, isn't that a beautiful chart?
It is.
Can you imagine typesetting that damn thing?
Tufty.
Oh my God. I know, right? It is exactly like Tufty. You know, the visual display of quantitative information. It's, oh, God, I love it. Okay, the first branch was memory, expressed as natural, civil, and sacred history. The second branch of human knowledge was reason, divided into knowledge of man and knowledge of nature. And the third was imagination, allegorized in the frontispiece next to truth, which took the form of sacred and profane poetry. Now get this.
It's the shortest column, but okay, go ahead.
But wait, there's more. These 3 aspects of human understanding literally form the branches of the Encyclopédie's tree of knowledge. In this conceptualization, note, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Oh, this is so enlightening. Note how theology becomes a subset of philosophy grouped with divination and black magic.
What?
Check it out.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, I know. Heretical assumptions such as these made devout Catholics and Protestants alike hostile to the encyclopedists and their work. Do you think? I mean, honestly, how different is that from right now? Too much knowledge? It's so beautiful to see how memory and reason and imagination really put it all together, and putting theology in the same world as divination and black magic. Well, yeah.
Look, printing's there.
I know. And that's the beautiful, see right there in the science of man.
Logic, art of remembering, supplemental to memory, writing and printing.
It is the most beautiful diagram to me.
Recording.
This is like who we are and whose we are. I just it really is a beautiful thing. I mean, that's one of those things you should get
You should have somebody letterpress print that.
Well, you know, what is it? The public domain. I get these mailings. It's the public domain. They should just have this, and we should order it.
Oh.
We should just make.
It's certainly in the public domain.
We could just make people get it from us.
It's true.
You know, we really need your support here at Platemark, and if you were to buy this, buy us a cup of coffee and the map of the system of human knowledge. At any rate, I wanted for you to see. Boom! There's the entry on God.
It's not very long.
It goes on a while.
Keeps going.
And imagine that there are all of these different entries on politics too. It really, some rather inflammatory ones, you know, things on liberty and things that are by some of the greatest minds of the time. They were very inflammatory. But isn't that cool? Here's the entry on God. And it's right next to Dietz and Dietrichstein. You know, it's just another piece of information that you need to process.
Wow. Right?
Can you imagine how the church, this is God. And do you notice on the frontispiece, there's not one lick of information about the big God.
No.
And it's all women.
Right. That is weird. But in the end, even people who believe devoutly in God have to recognize that it's a concept.
It's a concept. And that's what these guys are saying.
Right. Well, I guess I'm with the Diderotians.
Exactly. The Diderotians.
Call me a Diderotian.
So let's see. Get this, though. Think about this. The publication consisted of 28 volumes with 71,818 articles and 3,129 illustrations.
I can't even keep that straight. Okay.
The first 17 volumes were published between 1751 and 1765. 11 volumes of plates were finished by 1772. Engraver Robert Bernhard provided at least 1,800 plates for the work. And this I love. The Encyclopédie sold 4,000 copies during its first 20 years of publication and earned a profit of 2 million livres for its investors.
Holy crap.
Because of its occasional radical contents, the Encyclopédie caused much controversy in conservative circles. After the publication, it was briefly suspended from publishing by royal edict in 1750. There were all of these really astonishing. Let's see, you have Diderot, but you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau in there. You have Voltaire, who's writing in there. You have Montesquieu. You have all of these different really important minds contributing their articles to that. The most prolific contributor was Louis de Jocqueur, who wrote 17,266 articles between 1759 and 1765, or about 8 per day, representing a full 25% of the Encyclopédie. The publication became a place where these contributors could share their ideas and interests. So it was a forum. It was the first thing of its kind, but it's in print. And, you can still go get it. And, all right. And the other reason I get so stoked about this is because the first time I ever even really knew about it, I saw it in person. And there it was, on the shelves at the Peabody Library. And my whole little geeky self went, oh, with the same kind of thrill of holding the first edition of The Origin of the Species. That people were brave enough to do these things.
Did we know much about the organization of it? Like, I'm immediately thinking of the Oxford English Dictionary.
Alphabetical.
But they were shipping out entries to X, Y, and Z, and somebody who did 25% of them, and who organized, was it something?
Oh, Diderot was the chief, thank you. Diderot was the chief editor. He contributed thousands of entries, but he was the primary editor. D'Alembert worked with him for a while and was the other editor, but Diderot was in charge of the editing overall. So you could really, for mostly we just call it his encyclopédie.
Okay.
But
the OED had a group of men who were
always going to
some
vet it.
Society or whatever.
Yeah. But so I'm showing the page on God here. That's just letterpress. But if we were thinking about all of the different articles about liberty and different concepts of how human self-rule, those were in the Encyclopédie. Of course, the French crown was pissed off.
Right. But wait, go back. There's portraits on this one page of D'Alembert and Diderot, and I love it. D'Alembert has his
wig on,
and
Diderot does not.
He's too tired.
Well, but that's the other thing was when these Enlightenment. That's right. The Enlightenment thinkers started putting themselves into the working man's clothing instead of dressing up. They were of the people.
He's got an open collar and a whole nine.
And that's the same thing with that Voltaire portrait that I showed you at the beginning. Was that it's like the genius comes in working clothes because the genius is always working.
Right.
It doesn't just get all prettied up for the event. But so just as a lovely way to sort of sign off here, I just thought I'd share with you a little bit of the recueil des planches, but just to know some of the tastiness that were in there, the various kinds of things that you could learn about hydraulics and beautiful orthographic and axonometric and, cross-section kinds of layouts. And it was fold-outs, and they were of the highest order of expertise in terms of the drafting of it, and then the engraving of it, and then the printing of it, and assembling that with all those pages. It's phenomenal to me. It ships the idea of how to rig a ship. Imagine coming up with that engraving, but then also having to put all of the lines for all of those masts and all of that. It's like, and the scale of the whole, it's just, and then of course, there has to be the entry on, I love this, isn't it cute? Well, here's the anatomy, but look at, in this case, our skeleton is holding a shovel so he can bury himself.
You're right.
But, he's labeled so you can learn about the bones. I just think about how that, when I compare Vesalius, which was published in 1543, to the way the dancing skeletons looked in the Nuremberg Chronicle in those 50 years, what happened. And when I think about when I look at these 17 volumes and 11 volumes of pictures of, are you ready? Anatomy, more amazing anatomy. So this is what the structures of the midsection look like. Here's the muscles of the heart. Here's the lungs. That these are how they break out. Everyone should know about these things, not just a learned few. And then, I love this. So how self-referential can you be? There's the whole colonnade of the Louvre, so you know what proper architecture looks like, of course, even if it is very neoclassical, but of course it will be more so. And then I love this. Here's a map of California.
Holy crap.
Wait a minute.
Wait.
Yeah.
1751.
Yes. So think about what it meant to get to that side of this continent, map it,
and get back to
render it, engrave it. And again, what kind of projections do you use? How do you encapsulate that information? How far in does that inlet go? We found these kinds of waters here. God. And then, of course, the most delightful, I love this page, the page on handwriting, the art d'écrire. Look at her, Anne. Describe this for our listeners, please.
Yes, well, this is a planche, the top half of which shows a woman at a writing desk full forward for us, and there's a little diagram that shows the proportions of how the figure sits in space writing at a desk. And below that are some calligraphic examples, some examples of pens, and also a hand.
Of nibs, but also
writing.
How much pressure. Again, weight, speed, and placement, because I want you to think about the fact that these flourishes are being represented by an engraver into an engraved plate who has to move that burin through the copper to create the same flourishes that look as effortless and beautiful and arabesque-like as the woman who's sitting at this what period empire blah is that with her delicate self in her lovely 1760s home. You know, it's not Rococo, but it seems kind of Rococo. But the idea of what true, beautiful handwriting should look like. Oh, my God. Just look up in your Diderot and you'll know how to make your flourishes, everybody. But wait, here's our fun part. So the idea of how to do letterpress printing.
God, they had a...
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
Go ahead. Tell them about Jesus Christ. What's it say?
Okay, so this is a planche where the upper quadrant shows men setting type. Is that a woman on the right? Setting type in a print shop or a news publishing shop.
Yes.
And then below is some diagrams of letter forms, lead letters.
Yep.
And then there's
actually in a compositing kind of compositing stick and compositor and look at how beautifully rendered it. And here, what is it? Gloria Dieu. Oh, come on now, this is hilarious.
Glory to God.
Yes, it says glory to God. That's what they're using for the illustration on the printing.
But it's backwards as you would see the type itself and how it was sitting in the block in the thing.
Yeah, and I don't know, the chase. I didn't do letterpress. But
that means that the engraver had to engrave it forward.
Right. Yeah. It's just, and really, it is of the highest order and so beautiful. See, in it, you understand what type high is. Mm-hmm. You understand what each of those, mind your P's and Q's, and each of those little tidbits of lead.
Lowercase.
Mm-hmm. And you can see it right here. It's not the California job case, but it is definitely, look, I gave it to you. Look at there they are, the uppercase and the lowercase. So the lowercase, of course, are going to be closer to you because those are all the small letters and all the big capital letters. Correct. And so the upper ones, the caps that you only use at the beginning of sentences and whatnot, are in the uppercase because you have to reach farther.
Little food for thought.
Isn't that just delightful? And so, but wait, there's more because you get to see all of the different ways that how to actually make prints. And so there's a lovely, I love this plate so much. So it shows a really very busy etching shop where a guy is actually smoking a plate that's been grounded, that's suspended from the ceiling. There's another person who's sitting by a window with a diffusing frame so that he can scribe into a copper plate at the right-hand side. And then another spot, the fellow that's second from the left, that's actually how they would pour the acid across the plates.
What?
And they didn't just soak in a tray. They would pour it across and pour it across and pour it. Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah.
Why would they not just dunk it in a tub?
Because I didn't get there. But imagine, when we talk about Whistler and what he did to those hotel tables, that'll be a different deal. Right. But yeah, actually, that's the way they would show it in Rembrandt's time as well. But to see how...
You know that?
Yeah. It's so weird.
That is weird.
I know, because we're used to just setting it in a...
I assumed this whole time that anybody using etching was using a flat tub.
But, how long did it take them to figure out, hey, let's use copper instead of iron. Hey, let's use this acid instead of that. And it was the Dutch to say, hey, if we use this acid, it's going to go really well. Yeah. And I think, if maybe that's how Rembrandt, now that we're talking about it, if you're pouring it across and pouring it across and pouring it across, you can keep your eye on it way better. And his mark is so light and delicate. I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Because you could more easily
observe
just a little bit there and more over on the right.
But you could also observe it more. It's like the more it passes across.
We should try one.
Of course. All right. We'll look at our calendars. It really would be worthwhile.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I think every time I look at Rembrandt's mark and I think about how delicate it is, I think you can stop it at any point more easily.
Barocci with the little wisp of a background.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So here it's showing you how to use your burin for engraving and the various kinds of stylus. So I thought you'd enjoy that. But in a close-up of the print shop, isn't it just so lovely? Look how happy they're all busily working away and doing their etching things, and it explains the whole process to you. You're going to love seeing this when Anne puts them up. And then, oh my God, I just adore an engraving of the engraving process. It pleases me so tremendously. So here's the original drawing at the top, and then we poke holes through, and we transfer it to the plate, and then here's how you hold your burin. You're going to work your way through, and then here's how you do your cross hatching. Here's how deep the lines have to go into the copper. It really tells you absolutely everything about how to do the process, which really, in prior centuries would have been the domain of just the master and and now it is the democratization of information. Isn't it just lovely? It's just every one of these things. It's this, look at the curl. It's just like, when the tale of our friend who just passed, Hector Sonnier, who just passed. Go ahead, tell him a little nod to Hector, because he was an engraver just like this.
Oh, yeah, Hector printed for Hayter towards the end of Hayter's life, and then took over the operation of the atelier as it transitioned from the Atelier 17 to Atelier Contrepoint. And Hector was a consummate printer.
Oh my God.
And engraver. I mean, he had the same facility with a burin that Hayter.
It was so lovely. He must have been in his late 70s, maybe.
At least
when he demonstrated his burin technique, which was in the same manner of this effortless, smooth, curving line, like that handwriting I was showing. And in this particular illustration, it's showing the curlicue of copper that comes up from just this consistent weight and speed and placement of the burin. And I'm going to tell you, that is not easy, and it requires strength, and it requires control without tension. And that I'm learning from musicians. Control without tension. When you get tense, things and it's just, look at how elegantly that is depicted. That on every level, you've got the art, the science, the printmaking, it's all there, and it was for everyone to put it all together on how to print these things, and here's how you set up your print shop, and here's how we're going to print the plates to run them through a letterpress. In this case, you have this image of how to print in the Encyclopédie, and it's showing the copper plate. They're showing you exactly how they printed the copper plate engravings for the planches that you're looking at.
Right.
It's like the sun wearing sunglasses. Right. There's something so special about it. And then Diderot was accused of plagiarism because the plates were so similar to some others. Oh, it's just so much intrigue and wonderfulness. But the bottom line, with all of this Enlightenment stuff that we're talking about, with just these four things, we've got Hunter and his gravid female uterus from 1774. But then we step backward to the Albinus, which is, in the 1740s. And then you've got the Dagoty from 1746. And then we have the Diderot Encyclopédie. It's just interesting to see how the mind was allowed to move forward. And so the thing that I always put there for my students to start thinking about, what was it about the 18th century? History is lived forward but learned backward. I make this punch list. It took me years to kind of come up with this, but I still think in retrospect, this is really what that century meant, was that, using science and direct observation, the power of reason, using your own brain, questioning everything, that you could have the entry for God next to diapers. The sacred and the secular side by side. Optimism in many ways is like, hey, yeah, we could do it. We could become what we want to be, that men and women could be made better, that education could end up being the useful thing. Just think about Diderot saying, I'm going to make sure that everybody has access to knowledge. I'm going to come up with this thing. We're going to call it an Encyclopédie. And it's going to be by all the best guys that know the best stuff about each of these subjects. But the idea of education and progress, improving society, the Diderot Encyclopédie has been credited with really being the thing that helped start those revolutions, because people had access to that information about freedom and liberty and not the king and not the church, developing the taste of the growing middle class, making them literate. Diderot's goal with the Encyclopédie was the bourgeoisie, the upper middle class, being able to get that for themselves and being proud of who you are as a nation, and not just living lavishly, but, maybe being a worthwhile human being, practicality, all of these things that I can't quite do, but I can try. But the Enlightenment, it is a glorious thing. And we just talked about, the anatomical books in the Encyclopédie. Next time we'll talk about the other scientific discoveries and how brilliantly women were allowed to the discoveries of the women were published. We're going to talk about Maria Sibylla Merian, which is a huge deal when you consider what she did. And we'll talk about Thornton, and we'll talk about Gould and Audubon and those boys. But it's all an outgrowth of this. What would happen if we actually started thinking for ourselves? Anne, what would happen if we actually started thinking for ourselves? Like, not MAGA, not this, not that.
Well, so I assume that democracy is the full blossoming
Absolutely.
of the Enlightenment, right? We all think for ourselves, and we all can decide what kind of situation we want to be governed under.
Absolutely.
Right? But
if the sleep of reason produces monsters, because Goya is a product of the Enlightenment as well.
Yes.
And if you fall asleep at the switch,
yes,
and if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem.
It's timely for sure, and I agree with you with the optimism. Whenever the Enlightenment has come up in any project or studies or classes or whatever, I'm always like, this is it. This is when
it starts to happen.
Life becomes possible for everybody.
And
right?
even women can get involved.
But there's also the downside, which is that there's an insensitivity to other, right? And
other and udder and all of those things.
Right. So it's
but there's no way it can be perfect, because God knows we're certainly not perfect now.
And I don't know that the white men of the Diderot era could possibly have conceived of this idea that, but why wouldn't they? If they were so enlightened, why wouldn't they suspect that, the gentleman from India or the woman from Japan could have the same intellectual capacity and understanding of the world, and that everyone brings a different sort of thing, but that we all have a similar through line of humanity.
Right.
Right?
And that's, okay, but here we're still, come on, Israel, Palestine, Allah, God, like we're never going to fucking figure it out. But we can certainly hope to try. It's interesting just to see how even the most enlightened thinkers, the three-fifths of a human being, and then women, well, you're just a vessel.
Well, and we're still waiting for some stupid law to say we're equal. It's asinine. We don't even have to have one.
We still don't have, an equal rights amendment. And notice I still say we, because we as a human group, as Americans, where every American should matter.
Well, yeah, we're the Trump years, they failed 95% of the people in the country.
Yeah. Well, but this personhood, if the fetus is the zygote is a person, but the person bearing it isn't.
Right.
Well, so that's a perversion of knowledge there.
Well, and early childhood education is.
But it's so interesting to know that it actually came out of the Enlightenment as well.
Well, sure.
And then you start thinking about, the concept of children's books doesn't really start showing up until the later 19th century.
Right.
God, when I was thinking about the books I was buying my son, I was such a book slut. Because children's books, my God, how thrilling.
But there was a golden age of children's books when your kid was born and into when my kids were born. For sure.
Mine too, yeah. And it's just, but it's like being given the keys to the kingdom. And the keys were given, but the people that could reach those keys first developed a system. And as some of that knowledge trickles down to all of us that deserve it, I think eventually, maybe, we can get around to it. Maybe we can all become enlightened. And enlightenment, of course, is different for everybody, but it's still an amazing time. We could get mad at these stupid old white guys. We could get mad at them, but if you think about what they were turning it around from...
Right, true.
Louis the 14th and then, Madame Pompadour all kind of marooned out there at Versailles, but, okay, at least they can learn how to make etchings because, Boucher. And it's just... This shit's the same but at least we're doing a little better. But we won't if people don't learn from this stuff. And I guess that's what, you can't expect students to do their reading anymore. It has to be something that they can, a podcast they can listen to. God, I hope this helped.
Well, yes, for listeners out there, I have been told by several sources that there are professors in the world who are assigning parts of our podcast to students, which I find really wonderful.
Yeah, it's thrilling. And then you can just edit out the F-bombs, or you can say, well, that's what I use to keep those students awake.
They use F-bombs too, I'm sure.
Certainly when somebody dings their car. But it's just, still, to think about what a magnificent about face this was. I'm still so impressed with Martin Luther figured out what he figured out. And yes, as things got blah, and yes, Thomas Jefferson and blah, and then we can find fault with anybody. I'm sure we could be annoyed with Christ for some reason if you bought into that, or Hercules even. The thing about Greek myth is that they actually allowed those deities to have their foibles. They had their problems. They were vain. They were this, they were that. But any social platform, because we have access, imagine if we didn't have that access. What would happen if the Diderot Encyclopédie of our phones disappeared? What would you do then? You will look at what?
Wouldn't know.
TV? Nope, can't have TV. That's a screen. Okay, then what would you look at a newspaper? Nope, killed them all because of the TV. Well, should we look at the encyclopedia? Nope, can't have an encyclopedia because those were books and we don't do those anymore.
It's a double-edged sword, information.
Knowledge is power.
And also, but to your point...
Power corrupts absolutely. Don't let it happen.
As you've been talking, that's the thing that I keep thinking. Money corrupts, power corrupts. Anybody who rises up to the top, there's something about the human brain that switches to a different place when you have immunity from this or you feel you're powerful over somebody else.
Yeah.
It's a very scary brain space that whatever God designed the human brain for serial killers.
Why doesn't the law appeal to...
Why can we not be cooperative instead of fighting over borders and oil and wind?
Or the fact that God has got a bunch of different names, but we all realize there's something bigger than us, or at least we hope there is.
Hope. That's where I am.
We hope. But I'm going to continue to hope. And I'll go back to Carl Sagan. God is every natural law combined.
Okay.
Because you can measure those and you can...
No, I agree with you. Like, any God that you believe in has to be the summation of all of us.
It better be.
Right?
Even...
Because if we're trying to fit some God into our whatever overlord, it has to be all about us. We should be more humble.
Heck yeah, always stay humble. You got to stay humble. Like when you're carving wood, you better be humble. The wood's in charge. You're not in charge. None of us are in charge. We just, and that's why going back to that Desmond Tutu, no, I'm just a prisoner of hope. That's all we can really do is do our best, be the best person you can be. But, again, that still is the Enlightenment. It's not that it was prescribed that you're going to go to hell and you got to do Hail Marys. It's just be decent, be the best person you can be, learn a little bit, take notice, be grateful. Honestly, it might be simpler than I think any of us made it.
I think it is simple.
Yeah. And simpler is stronger oftentimes. Not simplistic, simpler.
No, of course. Yeah, no, I think my father and his dotage, who, I don't know if we've said this out loud on the pod, but my father died in January, and he spent the last, I don't know, I think it felt like 15 years, but it might have been 5. It might have been 2, who knows?
My dad did the same thing.
He got very philosophical about life.
Trying to figure the shit out.
Trying to figure out his spiritual journey, he called it. Mm-hmm. And he, he ascribed to a theory, I forget who the author was, that put forward to him that we have to, as a species, become cooperative and not combative in order to survive. And that goes to this idea of simplicity. The simplicity is we should cooperate with each other to live our lives.
And that then becomes the final movement of Beethoven's Ninth. He was born in 1770, he died in 27? Total, that's an Enlightenment thought. Alla Menschen. Right. It's still part of it. Just be grateful, be decent, be good to each other. Have a great week, y'all. Hope to talk to you soon. This has been fun. We'll talk about some really pretty flower books next time.
Yeah, we're just going to continue with the Enlightenment because there's a lot to unpack.
Boing. I know. And I didn't know it was going to turn into a personal therapy session. But I think it's okay.
I think that everyone has, well, maybe everyone hasn't really stopped to think about it, but I think these are questions that occur to many people.
I think when history of prints can...
Well, that's the beauty of it, right?
It's correct, because prints appear in books, and they appear as single issue, and they're part of the church, and they're part of the knot, and they're part of the... Just wait till we talk about Gilray and Rowlandson and all the guys that were lampooning politics. Come on, man. I can't handle that until after the election. That's the beauty of history prints. It is the people's art.
Well, I think that's the thing that the art historian, maybe that's the reason why they can't handle it. Because it spans
it's the messy
life.
It's the messy child.
Life.
It's the messy child.
It is
It's the messy child that, whose shoe is untied and has dirt on his shirt when he shows up for church. And it's the messy child that won't fit in a nice little category. But I think we're getting to a point, even as an art historian who is realizing how much I have to broaden my own teaching sense, History of Prints has always been allowing us to do that, because it is. It's
expansive.
It's miraculously that way.
Yeah.
So because they murdered some women so they could get better views of the gravid uterus.
Ay.
Yeah, but that changed obstetrics. It doesn't make it right.
Right.
Well, we could say Jonas Salk did some bad shit. But if you opened a door and we managed to walk through, you can't just cancel it and close the door. You can't. You can't.
So hard. Like Henrietta Lacks. Like there's so many examples of ways in which people have been taken advantage of, but that have advanced science so monumentally.
But then again, the Renaissance was saying that of, there's all this interregnum of the Christian church. It's like, hey, let's go back to Greece and Rome and let's look at that and let's set up our own democratic society. Let's have a city-state. Let's be a republic. That's not something that the church was prescribing. For every action, there's an equal and opposite
reaction.
And God bless us. I hope there's a reaction to the red hats. In a good way.
Yeah.
Well,
this
has been delightful. Honest to God, Ann, thank you so much for being here and making me do this. I'm glad to know that we have more on the... it's so hard when I start looking at all this stuff. It's hard because it's like, I want to do this all the time.
Oh.
There's all this other, email gets in the way. It's like,
if we could pay both of us full time to do this, we would do it more.
And this is why we'd love to ask you to subscribe to Platemark and get our wonderful chart of the knowledge of absolutely everything for the Diderot Encyclopédie.
Who could we have print that? Oh, I know who could do it.
Who?
Val.
Well, I know, right? I want one. I want a good size.
Val Lucas, if you're listening.
You will be.
We have a job for you.
Oh, come on. We can make that happen.
Yeah, I think so.
Love you to bits. Okay, loyal listeners. We'll see you next. Oh, gosh, just wait till we do Hogarth.
All right, everybody, that's where we're going to put a cork in it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It was it's a long one, but I think it's full of good stuff, and I do love the philosophical waxing we did at the end. Thanks to Tru, as always, for being our SME. I appreciate your thoughtfulness more than you can know. And a thank you also to my usual list of people, to Dan Fury for being my sound guy. Thank you, Dan. To Uncle Michael Diamond for being our composer. To Skip Bernhard and Lee Turner for being our sound effect guys. So appreciate your soundscapes from your studios. Thank you. Images are over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also, when you're over there, sign up for our email list and get notified whenever new episodes come out. You can be the first to know, and they go out bright and early on those Tuesdays to remind you to tune in. Also, think about joining our Facebook group. We're a happy group, chit-chatting about all sorts of stuff. Tons of artists in there. We're trading advice and new projects and stuff like that. All right. I think that's it. We'll see you next time.